Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is under pressure to delay plans to ban diesel and petrol cars by 2030. Manufacturers and industry leaders have demanded the Prime Minister rethink the extreme timescale, owing to the risk of major economic destruction and potentially hundreds of thousands of job losses, despite government plans for 300,000 charging point installations by 2030. The way things are going, currently only a third of charging infrastructure needed will be installed by the due date. Electric cars remain much more expensive, with your cheapest electric car on the market for about £20,000. And electric cars lack variability. According to Daily Mail poll, only 28% of the public are in favour of the ban by 2030. So not only are these plans unrealistic, but they do not have the public's backing. I'm joined now by someone who is in favour of these targets, TV presenter and motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure, Jacob.
First of all, motoring journalists are meant to be petrol heads, so how come you've become an electric head?
Are they? I mean,
just by reputation.
Where is it written, Jacob? So look, I supported, cutting fuel duty for a long time, and now we have the technology, so we don't have to rely on fuel. So we should look at this energy transition and try and think about how we pollute less in our cities and how we have energy security and cheaper energy for all, and that kind of begins with electric cars.
Look, I'm very keen on security of supply. I think that's fundamental, and also on lower prices, because actually every economy in the world does well on low energy prices. Absolutely. And low transport prices. But at the moment, electric prices are high, electric cars are expensive, the batteries are very complex to produce, the minerals you need to produce them are hard to extract and costly. How do you think in 7 years we get to what you're proposing, which I don't disagree with, but it's, can we get from here to there in this timescale?
Well, when you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, when I was driving a little Mitsubishi which did 50 miles to one charge, and here we are now, 10 years later, where we get 300 miles to one charge. So that race of technology is happening much, much faster than the internal combustion engine. So it's premature to say we're not going to reach these targets. We can see there are 1.2 million people out there with plug-in cars who have happily folded them into their lives, and they work. And if you talk about, the Daily Mail survey, I've got 50 MPs and parliamentarians, peers, who support this change, who are backing my campaign for lower electricity prices, cut the VAT, 20% VAT on public charging, get in line with 5%. The methodology of the Mail survey, I question. And I don't think, people are against this. There are millions of people who are worried about pollution and who are worried about their future and expensive energy, as you say.
Yes, but if electric cars are going to be cheaper and the charging is going to be competitive, this will happen anyway. It doesn't need regulation to do it. We didn't need to have regulation to move from the horse and cart to the motor car.
But if we didn't have regulation, for instance, the Californian Air Resources Board mandating no benzene and lead in petrol, we would still be breathing that stuff in, Jacob. So sometimes to shift historic transitions, you do need a bit of a nudge. And if you leave, companies to do what they've always done, we will burn what we've always burnt. And, these three pillars are energy security, clean air in our cities, and cheaper energy for all.
OK, but in the interim, aren't we actually missing out on cleaner energy? Because actually petrol engines are massively cleaner than they were 20 years ago. Shouldn't we carry on improving the technology that we've got and allow market forces to see this evolve and actually to see which competing technologies will really work in the end?
The petrol and the diesel engine has kind of reached its peak. We've had this 100 years to make them clean, and you're still burning stuff. Stuff will still come out the exhaust pipe. And if we went up the top of this building and looked over London, there would be this orange pall of pollution.
But a lot of that is from diesel still, that we were encouraged to buy.
Really?
And that becomes part of the further question on some of the minerals that are in the batteries. How polluting are they? What are the environmental consequences of digging them out? I see people now talking about digging them from the seabed to get the resources that are necessary. Are we really fully aware of the environmental risks that we may be taking with this rush to electric?
Well, if you take things like cobalt and lithium, which are the critical minerals, 50% of all Teslas now have no cobalt in them, in their batteries. And we've been using cobalt to refine petrol and diesel for years and years and years. We will have sodium-ion batteries soon. We will have solid-state batteries. So that technological acceleration will change the batteries, and we'll use less rare earth minerals. And don't forget, nobody has quantified how many CO2 emissions are from exploring oil, drilling it, shipping it, refining it, distributing it. Nobody knows what that figure is, Jacob.
Yes, but then when you look at the carbon emissions on creating an electric car, you may have high carbon emissions because you have to assume that the energy you're using is renewable energy. But that's not an accurate assumption, is it?
Oh, in this country, we have, 40 to 50% of renewable energy in our grid.
But therefore 40, 50% that isn't. And so if you think of the waste in conversion of electricity into motor power, you are losing a considerable amount of the energy from carbon sources that you would if you were putting it directly into a petrol engine.
Then if you have a combustion car, it loses 70% of its power before it gets to the rear wheels. I mean, it's massive.
Of course, but that's happening with the production of electricity in the first place as you go through the generators. So those losses are cumulative when you're still reliant on fossil fuels for the energy input.
But if you use a mix of hydro, wind, solar, nuclear... It's much, much better. And surely that's what we should be aiming for, instead of carrying on buying gas and electricity from monopolistic regimes who, will always charge more. Your story about the CMA, £1 billion we've been overcharged on petrol.
That's another story on whether we should use our own resources more, which I'd be very keen to.
Yeah.
But it's in a cost of living crisis. You see, I think people were very happy to move to electric and so on when the cost of living was low and it wasn't rising and everyone felt prosperous. But once you have inflation and people feeling less well off and they have to focus on the family budget more, then suddenly these things which sound good become unaffordable. And that the timescale, we are trying to be faster than anyone else.
Because we're thought leaders in this country.
Well, but then we're poorer.
Yes.
But that's no good. I don't want my voters to be cold and poor. I want my voters to be the most prosperous in the world.
But then they won't be if you're still buying gas from Russia and oil from Saudi Arabia.
We've got lots of our own gas, if only we'd get it from underneath us and we're sitting on it, which would be a sensible thing to do. But it's all about the standard of living of people in this country.
And the standard of living will be affected by taking off that yoke of expensive energy bought from monopolistic regimes.
But the petrol engine is still cheaper, and the petrol car is half the price.
If you look at a second-hand EV, like you can buy a Tesla for sort of £16,000-17,000.
Yes, but perhaps I've read Giles Corran too much on the dangers of petrol cars.
Well, perhaps.
Anyway, whose experiences with his Jaguar absolutely dreadful. As I have a very nice petrol Jaguar, I'm quite happy sticking